You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, it's day 3 of Trump's trial. Jury selection is underway, and I know there are a ton of questions surrounding who is being seated on the jury. So right now we're going to do a quick rundown. But first, just a reminder for those watching that we're going to be doing daily comprehensive coverage of this trial, only the important stuff, so we won't spam you. So if you want to follow along and have all of your questions answered, please make sure to subscribe. The link's right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. Okay, Glenn. So far, 7 jurors have been seated. I'm going to give the floor to you to do a rundown of the 7 who've been chosen. But before we do that, I have a question that I want to ask first. And there are some bits of information that worry me here on the jurors who have been selected. So one of the jurors, for example, gave the quote that Trump is fascinating and mysterious. Another said that she appreciates that Donald Trump speaks his mind. That's another quote. Look, Trump needs one juror to hang a jury. So does this kind of stuff worry you?
Brian, when I was picking juries, everything worried me. I heard those quotes and, they definitely piqued my interest. But, I think these jurors, once they've been placed under oath, and frankly, once they know or at least strongly suspect that their online presence, their social media accounts are going to be looked at by the parties, and we've already heard some talk about that during jury selection, I have to believe that most of them are taking the oath seriously and are answering the questions accurately and honestly. And look, Donald Trump is fascinating in the most horrific way, so I can't entirely disagree with that juror. Donald Trump does speak his mind. His mind is always either wrong or empty, so I can't disagree with that juror either. But to answer your question, everything a juror says that isn't sort of completely pro-government, pro-law and order, pro-prosecution will give me reason to be concerned. But the thing is, if they are so pro-law and order, pro-government, pro-prosecution, they're probably not going to be qualified to sit as jurors anyway. So thus far, as I say, I've heard some things that pique my interest, but none of them concern me all that much. I know we're going to talk about who these jurors are, what kind of work they do, where they get their news from in a minute. Let me just share this one insight. Because in the 30 years that I picked juries, I picked a lot of juries. I will say, when those 12 people were in the box at the end of jury selection, plus however many alternates were seated by the court, I always had this overwhelming sense that I feel like I got some things wrong in jury selection. And I don't know if I like the jury I picked. And then almost every time, Brian, by the end of the trial could last 3 days, 3 weeks, or 6 months. I spent 6 months with a jury in a RICO case. Almost always, I felt a kinship with my jurors because I had been giving it to them straight, the evidence, the arguments, not sugarcoating anything, not hiding the warts. You always front the weaknesses in your case with the jurors so the defense attorney doesn't spring the weaknesses on you. We call that drawing the sting. And by the end of my case, I almost always liked all of my jurors, and typically the cases worked out pretty well for justice. But yes, we're going to be scrutinizing everything that every juror says and wondering, is this a concern? Is this person a little bit too enamored of Donald Trump? But I have to believe whatever their preconceived notions are of Donald Trump coming into jury service, the evidence is going to blow them away, I predict, and is going to convince them of Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, I'm also trying to remind myself that these prosecutors who are selecting the jury members, they've done this before and they know what they're doing. Is that a fair approach, or is that me being overly trusting or kind of naive?
The more juries you pick, the better you get at it. I have always said jury selection is an art. It's not a science. And I've also always said you can lose a case in jury selection, but you can't win a case in jury selection. All you can do is try to pick 12 fair and impartial jurors, and then you have to win the case with the evidence and your arguments. So this prosecution team knows what it's doing. I'm sure collectively they have picked many juries over the years, and I have confidence that they are going to succeed in seating a fair and impartial jury.
Okay, well, now, can you tell us about who's been selected so far?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to look at the notes and do a rundown of the 7 jurors. And let's face it, we've only been in trial 2 days, and there are already 7 jurors qualified. That is a pretty good clip. We could have the jury impaneled by the end of this week with opening statements scheduled to begin early next week. But just to go over some of the jurors and kind of who they are. The juror number one is originally from Ireland. He works as a salesman. When asked if he'd heard about Donald Trump's other cases, he said, yeah, I've heard something about his other cases. Juror number two is an oncology nurse. Juror number three is a corporate lawyer. Juror number four is a self-employed IT consultant. Juror number five is an English language arts teacher. Juror number six is a software engineer for Walt Disney Company. Juror number seven is the second lawyer. That's a lot of lawyers, and the jury is only half selected. Works at a white shoe law firm. And most of these folks, Brian, said, I follow the news. Many of them said, I get my news from places like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Facebook, TikTok. Many of them said they don't follow the news all that closely. Most of them had some general sense about Donald Trump one way or another, but it wasn't such an extreme opinion that would render them unable to sit fairly and impartially in judgment of Donald Trump. So, as of right now, as I assess generally what I've seen of these seven jurors, nothing jumps out at me as being problematic. Nothing jumps out at me as suggesting that, we might have a mole on this jury. And one of the things that I think is helpful and instructive on, we don't want a mole on the jury front, is a number of these jurors have had some of their social media posts scrutinized. For example, one juror posted something about how everybody was honking their horns and celebrating after Donald Trump lost the last election. And this juror said, it was a celebration not unlike we used to celebrate the emergency workers and healthcare workers who were attending to folks who had fallen ill with COVID. And this was just another one of those celebrations. And that juror remains qualified to be on the jury. Then there was another juror whose, I think, spouse had posted something along the lines of, for gosh sakes, can you just lock Donald Trump up already? That juror was dismissed. So, thus far, I think the seven jurors can be fair and impartial based on what we've seen. And but we're only about halfway through jury selection at this point.
It seems based on what you went through that there are a lot of professionals, or just about all professionals on the jury. I mean, we have, everybody from nurses to lawyers. So does that strike you at all as unusual?
Not unusual. Ordinarily, we're looking for people who are professional people who are employed. I don't want to be callous about this, but
right.
Often if somebody is employed, one or another of the attorneys might strike them, not necessarily for cause, but peremptorily because they don't want somebody who is not gainfully employed. I don't know what you can take away from that. I'm just suggesting that it is one of the realities about jury selection. So it doesn't surprise me that you have, mostly employed folks, mostly professionals. That's not all that unusual when juries are being picked.
Okay. Now, they've already got, as you said, 7 of the 18 needed. Is this going faster than you anticipated?
Going much faster. And I attribute that to one really unorthodox thing that Judge Merchan did. It was surprising to me, and I have fielded lots of questions in the last couple of days that go something like, Glenn, how is it that 100 people, 96 to be precise, 96 potential jurors are brought into the courtroom? The first question is, anybody here think they can't be fair? And when they raise their hands, they're dismissed? No follow-up questions? I've never been involved in a jury selection like that. Why? Because not a lot of people are enamored of setting their lives on hold for a week or two or a month and serving on a jury. People are forever trying to get out of jury service, which I think is unfortunate. I think jury service is actually an honor and an obligation and a privilege to, be part of this system of government where you're not just thrown in prison by some government official. You are judged by a jury of your peers. I think it is a wonderful system of justice, though not without its flaws and its problems. But how easy would it be for people to just say, yeah, I can't be fair. Can I leave now? ordinarily what happens when they say they can't be fair, we probe that. We ask them questions, follow-up questions about why they can't be fair, and we test that a little bit. And if it's true that they really can't be fair given the nature of the case, then we'll go ahead and dismiss them. Judge Merchan said, we're just going to cut right to the chase. We're going to let everybody opt out who believes they can't sit fairly and decide the fate of Donald Trump. That was probably smart because that got rid of the people who the parties would have spent lots of time asking questions to probe their own self-assessment of not being able to be fair. So I think that's why we got the 7 qualified as quickly as we did, because so many of the people who thought they couldn't be fair were just able to summarily opt out.
Okay. Now, there are right-wing provocateurs out there, including a guy named Clay Travis, who works with Fox News apparently, who are calling for moles to just figure out a way to get themselves onto the jury and then refuse to vote to convict, and that would obviously result in a hung jury. What's your reaction to that?
You know, my reaction is that feels a lot like obstruction of justice or obstruction of justice -1. I mean, how anybody could openly advocate for people to sneak onto a jury in a criminal prosecution, disobey and disregard, violate the court's instructions, which could constitute contempt of court, and, don't vote the evidence, vote the ideology. Just do not convict Donald Trump, even if the evidence proves his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is dangerously close to being a criminal offense, urging someone to obstruct justice, commissioning someone to commit a felony crime. So I hope whoever that clown is, he has come to the attention of the authorities, and the New York authorities are assessing whether what he did might constitute a chargeable violation of the law. It may very well not, but boy, there is no place in the American criminal justice system or in our democracy for people to say, you know what, screw the rule of law. We want you to clear an aspiring day one dictator of all the crimes he's committed.
Well, on the merits of what he was saying, how can you reassure people who are watching right now that a mole won't make his or her way onto the jury and then just refuse to vote to convict?
We can't be certain. First of all, let's hope there aren't many moles out there. There aren't many people who are willing to commit criminal offenses themselves by answering a judge's questions during jury selection untruthfully after having taken a sworn oath to answer the judge's questions truthfully. But if they are out there, Brian, they are probably the kind of people who have not lived quiet lives, have not been stealth-like in their true feelings about Donald Trump or their willingness to break the law in support of Donald Trump. And you can bet the parties are doing deep dives online and in any other way they deem appropriate of who these jurors are to make sure that they're not answering the judge's questions saying, oh, I can be fair and impartial. I know nothing about these charges. I have no strong feelings about Donald Trump. I'm your man for this jury, or I'm your woman for this jury, only to have the parties find out that they've been ranting and raving on social media about, I'm MAGA all day long, and anybody wants to take down Donald Trump, they have to go through me. Those are the people who often can't kind of keep those proclivities under wraps.
Yeah. And to be clear, there are folks that work in these prosecutorial offices and even the defense offices who are probing everybody's online footprints right now to make sure that those people don't fall through the cracks. Is that right?
Exactly. So, interestingly, the attorneys, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys get to know the names of the jurors so they can do this kind of online deep dive. However, the public does not get the names of the jurors, though I will say I have been concerned as I've seen all the reporting about who these folks are, where they work, how long they have lived where they've lived. Some people were like, well, I've lived in New York 40 years and I am an IT specialist and I do this and I do that. It would not take a real sleuth to be able to determine the identity of some of these jurors. I hope that doesn't come back to haunt any of the jurors such that, their names then get put out in the public square and Trump supporters begin to get after them as, his supporters so often have when Trump has sent out his missive, his command, that, this person is trying to bring down your favorite president. What are we going to do about it? The message has been sent. I hope none of that visits the jurors in this case.
And just to be clear, will Donald Trump himself have access to any of the names of these jurors, or just his defense team?
Yeah, the court, I believe, has ruled that Donald Trump can be privy to the names, but if there is any hint of an abuse or of an improper disclosure of those names, then somehow there could be some remedy or perhaps even some sanction. But I think the ruling was that Donald Trump does get to know the names.
Okay. Well, we'll obviously stay on top of all of this as it continues to play out, including the rest of this jury selection process. So for those watching right now, again, Glenn and I will be doing comprehensive daily coverage of the Trump trial as it continues to play itself out. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. So you can just go ahead and hover over both of those names, click the subscribe button, and we'll keep you on top of everything as it continues to play out. With that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.